It was a huge privilege to take over the Grange School. If I tell you that when I first found the school, I had no intention of being a headmaster, no intention of being a head teacher at all. I was actually working for the local government at the time on developing a project to remotivate demotivated boys, particularly in reading and writing. And one of the schools the local government wanted me to try and include in the project was the Grange. So I remember walking through the doors. You know how sometimes in life you arrive at a place and you have no idea that that moment will change your life. You know, it was another day at work for me, and I arrived at this school and walked through the doors, and little did I know that walking through those doors would change my life forever. And I arrived and I found out a little about the school, and I heard that they had no school principal, no head teacher. They hadn't had a school principal for nearly 2 years. The school had been in decline for maybe 8 to 9 years. The academic results had been dropping. The problems in the school were, getting bigger. And for most people, for most normal thinking people, a school like that would be a place you'd want to turn around and run away from. But there was something inside me that just instantly fell in love. Some of those emotions that you can't explain. I stood there and was talking to the assistant principal, who was acting as principal at the time. And she was talking with a love for the school. She'd been there for nearly 40 years. She'd worked in this school all her career. And I fell in love with this place. And as I wandered around the school and met some of the students and met some of the staff who were pretty miserable, it wasn't a happy place, but I sensed the potential for magic. So yeah, I was lucky enough when I applied for the job to get the job. And by the way, the only reason I got the job was because I was the only candidate. So it wasn't because I was talented or super great. It was because I was the only person who wanted the job. So I started in this school. And the first thing for me that I think is really an important lesson for everybody in education, the school had, for the previous 10 years, had external advisors and government officials coming in, telling them what to do, giving them programs, giving them systems, giving them new ways of working. And over those 10 years, the staff had delivered those programs and increasingly become miserable that their passion was no longer part of the job, that it was their job just to deliver what other people had designed. And children, of course, aren't foolish. The children knew there was no passion in the teachers and the teaching. And when children sense that the people teaching them have no passion and belief, they stop caring too. So that was the environment. And for me, the priority wasn't actually to improve the exam results or make it a better academic school. My priority, first of all, was to help the school re-find its soul, its spirit, its passion. Because one of the things I passionately believe is that education is about the development of the human being, the whole human being. And if you're going to successfully educate human beings, systems and structures won't do that. People do that. And so I knew that my first job was to relight the fire in the school that had been out for so many years, to try and find its humanity. So we started our journey by asking a series of simple questions that I wanted to lead into conversations, that would lead into ideas, that would eventually lead into new ways of working, which the school had designed for itself based on its unique context, its unique understanding of its students, and its newfound passion. So I asked The first question I asked was, what do we want our children to look like as human beings when they leave us? Now, the Grange took children at 3 and those children left at 11. So that was a long journey, right? That was a 7-8 year journey. And I wanted to have a clear idea amongst our community of how we wanted to help those human beings develop during those very crucial, formative years. That led to some incredible discussions. And suddenly, because teachers were talking about what they believed, I saw the spark back in their eyes. And slowly, the conversations became more passionate. And the debates became quite strong. And I sensed a new energy in the staff. And this became very much the blueprint, the foundation for everything we built on top of that. The second question I asked, because one of the things I passionately believe about education is that children always learn best, not just when they're happy and when they're secure and when they feel safe, but when they feel the learning matters to them, when the learning is filled with interest and purpose and context and rich in experiences. You know, I've always been interested in the fact that children before they're 5 years of age are phenomenal learning machines. You know, before we're 5, some experts say we learn somewhere between 70 and 75% of everything we learn in our lifetime before we're 5. We learn to walk and talk. We learn to understand the voice and facial expression and body language. We learn to make sense of colour and shape and space and touch and smell and sound and sight. And all of these things happen before we're 5 years of age. And I've always been fascinated by that and troubled by the fact that that incredible arc of learning, as soon as children start school, slows down. And one of the critical questions for me has always been why? What is it that the education system does to these incredibly dynamic human beings who learn at such extraordinary rates? What is it we do to them that actually diminishes, slows down that progress rather than maintains or accelerates it? And part of that for me is about the fact that as children start formal schooling, as they grow particularly into the higher levels of formal schooling, learning actually becomes more and more abstract. It becomes further and further removed from real life. You know, we separate learning into subjects. So suddenly children think education is about math or language or science or geography or history or physical education or art or music or drama or dance. But they're seen as separate, disconnected things. Yet nobody lives their life that way. As adults, we don't live our life thinking, oh, it's Monday, today I'm going to do math. And today it's Tuesday, so today I do history. You know, life is led by mixing skills and knowledge and behavior across all kinds of contexts. And then you stir it into the richness of life, because life is such a gloriously unpredictable and exciting place. But it's all about experiences, you see. So the second question I asked may sound stupid, but the reason I asked it was because I wanted my staff to think about these things more deeply. And the second question I asked them was, why is school not as exciting as Disneyland? Because when you see children at Disneyland, they're smiling, they're happy, they're excited, even though they have to do things they don't necessarily enjoy, like queue for hours to go on a ride. They're happy and their eyes are lit. And the magic of Disney is that it's all about experiences. It's all about immersing yourself in worlds of magic and wonder. And this you can imagine, the people who maybe are watching this film should maybe go away and ask that question of their colleagues. How do we turn our school into Disneyland, a place of awe and magic and wonder, where everything that happens feels valuable and important to children? Because for me, there's no secret to learning. There's no secret to educational success. If you create an environment where the children feel valued and where the learning matters to the children because they can see how it connects to their world, their lives, their context, their environment, they'll want to learn. You know, I believe the system thinks very wrongly about children. The system seems to believe that children are born lazy and will only learn if they're made to. It's a ridiculous idea. Children are born with a desire to learn, with a passionate curiosity for the world around them. And that only stops when the learning no longer seems to offer that context and experience and awe and wonder and richness and connectedness to the world. So when we were having these conversations, we started to look at the conditions around young children when they're learning such extraordinary things at such speed. And anyone that has children of their own, or anyone who has been lucky enough to work with very young children, will know that the best way for very young children to learn is through role play, for pretending to be. So our children pretend to be doctors, and they pretend to run shops, and they pretend to do their own television shows, and they pretend all the time, and they role play with each other, and they pretend to be their mum, and they pretend to be their dad. And so I wanted to bring that into our school environment. And we talked and we tried things, and this is really important, I think, to stress when I talk about Grange. It wasn't finished and neat and packaged before we started. I think too often in many organisations, but particularly in education, we spend too long trying to finish a product or a system before we implement it. And I think it's a huge mistake, because things truly only ever evolve if you start from a small place and you allow it to grow. We tend to overthink things. We tend to think too hard about what will it look like, how will it be, how will we make it happen. And what we should do is just start, take one step on the journey. You know, people who want to climb Everest shouldn't stand at the bottom of Everest and look at the top and think about how hard the journey is going to be. People who climb Everest should take one step at a time. And the amazing thing about taking one step at a time is halfway up you pause and you look back and you can't believe how far you've come, right? So we had these ideas and we said, let's create an environment where our children are playing. Even the 11-year-old children who are about to take public exams, let's create an environment where our children are playing. Because if we can get them playing, doing the right things, they'll learn language, they'll learn math, they'll learn science and history and art and music and dance and geography and all of these things. So we created a town, just like a real community. And our town included a political system. So the children elected their own mayor and they had their own political cabinet who were to be answered to by the democracy. We had a television station, a radio station, we had a museum, we had shops, we had a cafe. All of these things the children were trained to run and then ran themselves. So they had their own community. Right? And the other thing about the community was I didn't expect teachers to be the experts. And this is another important learning thing for me. That education across the world seems to believe that children are educated in schools exclusively by teachers. And I don't believe that's a model that works in the 21st century because life is too complex. And teachers should no longer believe that they have to know everything that they're going to share with their students. For me, teachers should be facilitators of learning. They should be the brokers of relationships. So they don't have to know everything. They just have to find people who do know the things, bring them into school and help children understand the complex issues that are being shared with them. So when we were developing our town, for our mayor, for example, our mayor would spend 2 days with a member of parliament in London learning about democracy from somebody who did the job. When we built our television station, the BBC came in and trained our children how to run a television station and a radio station. We had a museum come in and teach our children how to curate a museum. We had major supermarkets come and teach our children how to run shops and so on. So there was a real authenticity to what the children were doing. And of course, our job as teachers was to make sure that through these experiences, they were learning language and math and science. And of course, the truth is, the children were learning these things at a rate far faster than they would if they were sat at a desk, listening to a teacher talking at them, or simply working out of a book. The project had a profound impact on our school. And whilst I don't necessarily agree with testing or exams, it's still the way that legally we were measured. So you can't not do these things. And within 18 months, in less than 2 years after starting the project, the pass rate of our exams went from below 50% to above 90% in under 2 years. And we didn't force feed our children testing techniques. So one of the other lessons that I think we learned was too often the debate around education is you can either have a dynamic and creative and personal curriculum, or you have an academic curriculum. And I actually think that argument is ridiculous. I think if you create a powerful, humanist, exciting, dynamic, creative curriculum and you do it well, children will still achieve and out-achieve academically. So I think this argument that it's one or the other is ridiculous. And I think, if I'm being provocative, I think politicians and educators need to stop it now. And they need to start finding out what they have in common. And they need to start talking about the development of human beings and how you do that most successfully, and building an education system from there. So in the school, one of the other things we did was we decided that because our children were in quite a socio-economically deprived area, many of our children didn't think that the idea of going to university was for them. They thought that was for rich kids. They didn't think it was even in their aspiration. And I wanted our children to realize that the whole world was open to them, and it didn't matter where they came from or what kind of families they came from, you know. And as many of the people watching this film will appreciate, given the environments they work in, some of our children come from horrific home environments, you know, and one of the great challenges for educators is to make sure those young people see that their life can still be positive and filled with ambition and aspiration and value and purpose and excitement. I truly believe that no child's life journey should be written because of where they're born. I think every child should be able to write their own life journey, and every child should have the opportunity to accomplish something meaningful for them. So the other thing we did was, on a Friday, our children didn't come to school. They came to their own university. And what would happen would be that the teachers and the parents and other people we got to know would design courses which the children would choose to sign up to. So the teachers didn't tell the students which courses they had to go on. There would be maybe 50 courses each 6 weeks, and the children would choose 2 courses. So we mixed them up by age and ability, it didn't matter. And they could do anything from contemporary dance to money management, to tennis, to folk music, to various arts and sciences and all kinds of offers. But the children chose what they wanted to study, and the workshops were run by people who were passionate about those things. So, for example, we had a teacher who in her spare time played in a folk band, but she'd never been able to share that passion with her students. Now on a Friday, every week she would come into work thinking, I can share my passion with students for folk music. So you have passionate teachers working with children that have chosen that course because they think they might be passionate about it. Can you imagine the power of the learning environment? So yet again, the launch of the university took our school to yet another level. And I suppose in finishing this part of my story, what I would say is I always look and measure how successful we were, not by the exams and the public accolades and the awards and the things that the school rightly achieved, but by returning to those first two questions. One, were we developing young people who were powerful human beings with incredible traits and skills and behaviors and attitudes? Yes. And had we created an environment that was as exciting as Disneyland? Definitely.